You'll notice looking at the course schedule that I have added a third section on Judaism, whereas the other ones I only included two. And that's, again, because there's so much in common between Christianity and Judaism that I wanted to take a little more time to point out some of these things. Notice with me the emphasis on the synagogue and thinking about the relation between Israel and the church. Just be aware that most of what we do in a typical church service actually reflects the kinds of activities that have taken place in the Jewish synagogue over the years. The word synagogue means house of assembly. Now, there is no mention of the synagogue as an institution mandated by God in the Old Testament. The synagogue probably arose somewhere during the captivity in Babylon, or perhaps even as late as the Greek period in Jewish history. We simply don't know for sure. But whether it came from the Babylonian exile or later, the reason that it arose is because Jewish leaders were concerned that Jews in captivity may lose touch with their Jewish heritage, with their history. And so they wanted to educate their people in a way that would make sure that they didn't forget. And therefore, the concept of a house of assembly, synagogue, came into being. And the church simply continued to reflect the same types of activities that had been a part of the synagogue life all along. And as I said, to this day, we continue to recognize that. Now, you have to remember that before the destruction of the temple and of Jerusalem at the hands of the Romans in AD 70, the temple was the main place of activity, the focus of religion and spirituality for the Jewish people. And the priesthood was front and center in all of this. But when the temple was destroyed and Israel was destroyed and the Jews were scattered, the synagogue became the chief place of meeting and instruction and spiritual meaning for the Jewish people. And rather than the priesthood being front and center, the rabbi, the teacher, became front and center. There's some discussion about the origin of the term rabbi. Some have actually suggested that Jesus may have been one of the first to be called a rabbi. Others say no, it goes back farther than that. But the word means teacher. And so the transition from the temple to the synagogue and from the priesthood to the teacher, rabbi, is very, very important in Jewish history. In many traditional synagogues, there needed to be 12 windows representing the 12 tribes of Israel, and the synagogue was to face toward Jerusalem. Now, you need to understand that there are many, many different kinds of synagogues today, and remember that because there are different branches of Judaism, Reform Judaism, Orthodox Judaism, Conservative Judaism, Reconstructionist Judaism, the synagogues and their forms and functions are going to vary quite a bit. But the initial idea was that these 12 windows were to be reminders of the 12 tribes, and facing Jerusalem, of course, was a reminder of the hope of Israel being restored to its place of origin and its capital city, Jerusalem. And then these synagogues contain what was called a bema. Now, bema is a Greek word which means an elevated place. In the Greek world, this was used as a place for politicians to stand before their people and make political pronouncements. And it was also used at athletic events as a place for awarding the victors in a race. And so this word was adopted by the people of God to refer to a place where the Torah would be exalted and read. And as I said, branches of Judaism follow various norms. In some synagogues, the men and women will sit on separate sides. In other synagogues, it doesn't make any difference. In some synagogues, the way you dress may be important. In others, it really doesn't matter. Again, this depends on the branch of Judaism of which you are part. And because synagogues were not mandated by God in the Old Testament, then the president of any particular synagogue, the leader of a particular synagogue, really has the right to determine how the rules and regulations are going to apply in that location. And that makes each synagogue autonomous. They can do things the way they want. It's not that much different from the way we do church today, if you will. Even in conservative evangelicalism or even fundamentalism, you find a variety of church buildings, of church layouts, of orders of service, of styles of worship, of dress, and other things like that. Here are some photos of synagogues, and this one is the most famous of all. This is the one found in Capernaum, which is right on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. And if you look closely, you can see dark gray stones at the foundation, which some believe are from the original foundation during the time of Herod the Great. And there is just a lot to learn by walking through and noting some of the arrangements of the synagogue, some of the pieces of furniture that would have been a part of synagogue worship. This is a view of the same synagogue, but backing off so that you can see its location on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. And that round building, just in front of it there, is the traditional site of the house of Peter. Now, whether he actually lived there, remember Jesus healed his mother-in-law of a fever, and so you have to keep in mind that Roman Catholicism established a lot of sites that they claimed were the original, exact location of such and such an event. And so, we don't really know, but that is at least a representation of the house of Peter. Now, there's also a synagogue in Gamla. Gamla is up in the Galilee as well, and the reason I included this synagogue is because Gamla is significant for a couple of reasons. Number one, the leader and founder of the Zealots, which were sworn enemies of Rome, actually came from Gamla. And when the Romans began their conquest of Israel, which resulted in the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, Gamla was the place where they began. And then they eventually destroyed Caesarea, the port city on the coast, and worked their way in toward Jerusalem. But the most complete synagogue that is still standing from ancient days in Israel is the one we looked at in Capernaum. And then, again, you can go online and find oodles and oodles of photographs of varying kinds of synagogues. This is just one of the myriads that are available. You really shouldn't talk about Judaism without mentioning the Holocaust. A Jewish person who is really wrestling with the Holocaust may ask a question like, why would God allow this to happen to his people? And one of the things that we have to be careful of as Christians is not to come back and say, oh, it's easy. The reason the Holocaust happened is because Jews have rejected their Messiah, and so God's allowing them to be punished. That would not be a wise and loving way to answer. We do believe that God is calling the attention of his people because of their rejection. But we also must remember that Satan is a sworn enemy of the Jews because he knows that the promises God made to the Jewish people are in fulfillment of the Messiah and his ministry and all that's going to happen prophetically. And so Satan has been opposed to the Jewish people and their existence from the very beginning. And so you want to be very careful in how you answer that question. And in fact, it might not be a bad idea to say, that's a really good question, and we don't know all the reasons why God allows what he allows. But one of the things that we can say is that God wants you, rather than rejecting him and turning your back on him because of what he allows, to search the scriptures and find out what God might be trying to communicate through this. That's a way of saying it that is less offensive and less likely to drive a person away. And yet at the same time, you are calling attention to the fact that God wants his people to search for him and know him. The word Holocaust actually refers to a burnt offering or destruction. In fact, in Portuguese, we use the word holocausto to refer to that whole burnt offering. The Holocaust took place between 1933 and 1945. 6 million Jews and 6 million Catholics, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, Slavs, Gypsies, and others were destroyed. You should keep in mind that the purpose of the Holocaust was not only to destroy the Jews, but there were other groups like these who were also on the list of those to be eliminated as Hitler and the Nazis tried to establish a pure race. And then, of course, there was those who really worked hard to try to save Jewish people, and one of them was Oskar Schindler. Now, there's a movie called Schindler's List that kind of depicts this. I just want to warn you, if you choose to watch that movie, be aware that there are some scenes there that might be questionable or even prohibitive for some believers. And so, use caution when you're considering that. Corrie ten Boom is a very famous evangelical who hid believers, and many of you know the story and have read things about Corrie ten Boom and the work that she did to assist the Jewish people. And so God had his people, and of course we know that he would never have allowed the Jewish nation to be completely destroyed because of the promises that he has made to her and the ultimate redemption that Israel will experience in the future. Now, Zionism is a term that's used for Jews that are largely political in their zeal. They're not known for their devotion to Jehovah. In fact, there's a debate about the Jewish nation state and Jewish identity. They would identify themselves as national Jews, not as religious Jews. Zionism is a word that refers to Jerusalem. Technically, originally, it was a section within the city of Jerusalem called Zion, but it has come to be known more generally as the city of Jerusalem. Zionism seeks to resettle Jews in their ancestral homeland, not because they embrace the promises of Jehovah, but because of political and national zeal for their land. Theodor Herzl, who lived from 1860 to 1904, is known as the founder of Zionism as a political movement, and you can read more about him. Interesting story. Christian Zionism recognizes Israel as a state as a prerequisite to the second coming of Christ. So believers in Jesus also recognize the importance of the land, but for a different reason, because of the spiritual implications in the coming of Jesus to establish his kingdom there. And then Messianic Jews are those who recognize Yeshua, Jesus, as the Messiah. If you're speaking to a Jewish person, it's very good to use the term Yeshua because that's the Hebrew word for Jesus. Also, be aware that the word Messiah means anointed one. You should know that. You believe, and I believe, that Jesus was anointed at his baptism to become the Messiah of God's people. And that does create a bridge between traditional Judaism and Christianity. We all believe in the Messiah. The difference is who that Messiah is. And Messianic Jews are not necessarily converts coming out of Judaism, but they recognize the fulfillment of Judaism being the person of Jesus Christ. We talked about that in a previous lecture. Is Christianity a sect of Judaism, or is it the fulfillment of Judaism? And you could argue both ways. All right, and then just looking at the branches of Judaism one more time, you can see that there's quite a variety. The two largest groups are actually Reform Jews and Jews who do not claim any denomination. And then the next largest group would be the conservative or Jews. And then the Orthodox Jews can really comprise only 10%. They may be the ones that get the most attention. You see pictures of them and all that, but they're really only 10% of the entire Jewish population. And this would be a picture of some of those Orthodox Jews. Again, this being a particular group that would dress and maintain their hairstyles in a particular fashion to communicate the things that pertain to their version of Orthodox Judaism. And they would wear head coverings in a way as a way of honoring Jehovah in his presence. And then we end with this one, the Jewish flag that has the Star of David. One thing you should understand is the Star of David is a relatively recent addition to the Jewish tradition. David did not invent this star, okay? There's debate as to exactly when it came about. Some say somewhere in the 1800s. And even the significance of the triangle, are those to signify the Trinity in some way? Probably not, because the Jews would reject the idea of a Trinity. Maybe it represents the law and the prophets and the priesthood. There's just a lot of debate as to exactly what those intersecting triangles refer to. But just be aware that that's more of a modern addition to Jewish tradition. Well, so much more to say about it, and I commend a study of Judaism to you, and I think that you'll see gain a greater appreciation for the relationship between Judaism and Christianity, and yet at the same time seeing the tremendous differences that to create a chasm between these two groups.